Lesson 12A. We started a few lessons ago with solving inequalities, and then the next day we discussed word problems where you had to set up an inequality and solve. Today we go a little bit more in depth with this idea of inequality. So today we'll be working on developing inequality relationships. Language objective, explaining reasons for relationships between inequalities, and you'll see what we mean by that in a few minutes. And then, of course, our normal, why am I learning this? So once again, 2 lessons ago, solving inequalities. Sometimes we have to reverse the inequality symbol. Sometimes we do not. We even went really in depth and talked about the fact that sometimes inequalities lead to no solution or infinite solutions. But the idea and key here with inequalities that makes it differ a little bit from equations is that we do have to graph the solutions. And then when we started the idea of word problems, we talked about the fact that there are other word phrases that lead to is less than, is greater than, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. And all of these things are in your notes from a few days ago. All right, so today we're going to be doing 3 things. So for each situation, you're given a mathematical statement and 2 expressions beneath it. What you will need to do is to decide which of the 2 expressions is greater, if the expressions are equal, or if the relationship cannot be determined from the statement. You'll then need to write an equation or an inequality that shows your answer, and then you need to either explain in words or with math why your answer is correct. So here's an example. I'm giving you the statement x equals 8. Which is greater, x plus 5 or 3x plus 2? Any ideas there? Which one is greater? It should be obvious. The one on the right, so 3x plus 2. And that is correct. So we're stating that the answer, the one that's bigger, is 3x plus 2. And the reason why it is bigger is because when you substitute 8 in for x for 3x plus 2, you get 26. And when you substitute 8 in for x into the other expression, you only get 13. And 26 is greater than 13. So you need to explain which one is greater, or if they're equal, or if you cannot determine it, and then the reason why, either with math or in words. So let's go to number 1. Statement. Y is less than x. So the question is, which is greater, x minus y or y minus x? So what I would do is I would start making up some numbers for y and making up some numbers for x that satisfy that, where y is less than x. I would try some positive numbers. I would try some negative numbers. And then try and determine which one is greater, x minus y or y minus x. I'll give you about a minute to figure that out. Which one's bigger? Which one's greater? Why is x minus y bigger?
X minus y is greater than y minus x, because if y equals 4 and x equals 5, 5 minus 4 is 1, and 4 minus 5 is negative 1, and 1 is greater than negative 1.
Very good. Perfect. And in fact, those are the same 2 numbers that I used right here. All you had to do was create a situation where the number you picked for y is less than the number that you picked for x. And then you start plugging them in and seeing what you come up with. And obviously, x minus y is greater. And that's one example why that is true. Okay, everybody try number 2. The question in this one is, which is greater, 5 or x? Which one's greater? Cambry?
X is greater than 5.
Why?
Because, well, I kind of just took it that you solve that equation or the inequality, and you end up with x is greater than 5.
Okay, very good. So you solve the inequality, you get x is greater than 5. So that tells you right there that x is bigger than 5. So obviously, x has to be greater than 5, or greater than the 2, because of that statement right there. So once again, x is greater than 5. Let's try number 3. All right, number 3, the statement is 10 minus 2x is less than 6. The question is, which one is greater, x or 2? Ryan?
X, because when you solve the equation,
Inequality?
or the inequality,
Yep.
you get X is greater than 2.
Okay, good. X is greater than 2 when you solve the inequality, so therefore, x has to be greater than 2. All right, let's go to number 4. In fact, I would like all of you to try 4 and 5. So number 4, once again, we talked about that just a second ago. 1 is the greater of the 2 because x is 0. Now, when I walked around with number 5, some of you think that AB is bigger, some of you think that A over B is bigger, some of you think that they are equal. Well, I have something to tell you. It cannot be determined because it all depends, and some of you, after I encourage you to try different numbers, you realize that. It all depends on what B is. If B is -1, then they're equal. But if B is something else, and remember, B has to be less than 0, then they will not be equal. So right there you have 2 different situations. And the only way it can be greater, if one of them is greater, is if it happens every single time or the same thing with regards to being equal. All right, everybody try number 6. So I guess the first thing you need to realize, and I probably doesn't really matter in this one, but an integer is a number that could be positive or negative or 0, no decimals, no fractions. Okay? So what happens if you think that n is 5, which is an integer? Then which one is greater? N or negative n? N. But what if n is -2? Now which one's bigger? What if n is 0? Now they're equal. So you've got 3 different situations here, so obviously this one cannot be determined. Let's go to number 7. So in number 7, we don't know exactly what x is. It looks like it's around -2.5. We don't know exactly what y is. We know it's between 0 and 1. And it looks like it's less than 1/2, so somewhere between 0 and 1/2. But we don't know exactly what it is. And we don't know exactly what z is. We know it's around 2. It doesn't look like it's quite 2, maybe like 1.9. But that's really all we know. So now we're trying to figure out from that information which is greater, 1 or yz. And I'll give you about a minute to figure that out. All right, anybody think that they have this one? Which one's bigger, 1 or yz?
I think YZ is bigger because it's automatically going to be a positive number, and positives are bigger than negatives.
Yeah, but what if this is 1/4? That's about what it looks like, maybe 1/5. And z is not 2, it's almost 2. But if you multiplied 0.25 times 1.9, which is, that's about what they are, is that going to be bigger than 1 or smaller than 1? It's smaller than 1. So it looks to me like no matter what those two are, yz is going to be smaller, so 1 has to be bigger. Think about this. Even if y was 1/2 and z was 2, which neither one of them are, they're both less than that. 2 times 1/2 is 1. So that should clear that up, that 1 is the bigger of the 2. Okay, so here's what I would like you to do. We're going to do 9, 10, 11, and 12. Let's do the next 4 problems. Number 9, which is greater, x or y?
Cannot be determined
Why not?
because x can be any number between 0 and 10, but y can be any number between 0 and 12. So y could be 11 and x 2, or x could be 10 and y 3.
Yeah, you could come up with a situation where they're the same. You could come up with a situation where x is bigger than y, and you could come up with a situation where y is bigger than x. You can't determine it. So it cannot be determined in that one. How about number 10? Which is greater, n or 3?
I think 3 is bigger than n because n would have to be 1.
Exactly. In order to make this statement here true, n has to be 1 because 3 to the third power is 27. So if n is 1, obviously 3 has to be bigger than that. Number 11. Statement 5 is greater than 4. Which is greater, 5x or 4x?
It cannot be determined because if x is positive, 5x will be larger, but if it is negative, then 4x.
Perfect. You tried positive numbers, you tried negative numbers. One would give you 5x being larger, the other one would give you 4x being larger. Now we're starting to get the idea of what's happening here. How about number 12? Which is greater, x, or no, the statement is x is greater than y, so which is greater, x plus a or y plus a? Cambry?
X plus a is greater than y plus a because if you're adding the same amount to both of them, one is gonna still be greater than the other.
Exactly, exactly. All right, let's do number 13 and number 14. Let's take a look at these last two of this type. Number 13, when I walked around, most of you totally understood that this one cannot be determined for the same reason as one of the previous problems. And then some of you struggling a little bit with number 14. You're wanting to make it like one of the previous problems, but the issue in this one is that yes, x is greater than y, but also y is greater than b. Or excuse me, a is greater than b. So what happens in this one then?
The thing is that we don't know what the variables are, so we don't know how much we're subtracting from either
Right?
one. So let's say x equals 5 and y equals 4.
Yep.
And a equals 6 and b equals 5.
Yes.
You can get varying answers depending on.
Right. So what happens then is that this one cannot be determined. Okay, and then those last two problems in here are just a reminder about the different ways that we've talked about how to deal with equations or, and lately, inequalities with fractions. You could multiply by the common denominator to clear out the fractions. That's one possibility. In this problem, you could get away with, kind of pretending like it was a proportion, but that's really what you're doing when you're multiplying both sides by the common denominator. Same thing in this one. You can't do a proportional thing on this one because of the plus 1 there, right there. So just remember all of those things that we've talked about. All right, we are finished.